Thomas and Friends is something I've spent my whole entire life watching and knowing about. The model work, the animation of the later seasons, and the character work when they do it well has made some of my favorite moments in fiction. With such a well-crafted world by Wilbur Audrey, and thanks to Britt Allcroft, David Mitton, and for the first 2 seasons, Robert D. Cardona, it had an amazing on-screen adaptation. Here's the funny boat show! You know, the order they're in is kind of a little strange, I must say. I mean, Big Mickey does this maneuver that helps save everyone, but then later in an episode they act like we just met him. In Jinx, they bring up Tencent's Hooter causing Boomer's Jinx, but that was kind of out of nowhere, and I can't forget the amount of cuts that are in HighWinds especially. Well, if you have ever thought like this, you are not alone. Tugs episodes were originally 20 minutes in length, but were cut down to 15 for television. 4 20-minute cuts would end up releasing on VHS, and a 20-minute work print of the episode Warrior, titled at the time War is Longest Day, exists, which I actually recently pieced together, and I highly recommend you watch this after that video if you're interested. But besides these 5 episodes we have right now, the 20-minute cuts are mostly lost to time. But thanks to some storybooks, leaked behind-the-scenes material, and promotional images, we got an idea of what these extended cutscenes were actually like. Now, these cutscenes aren't like a Spider-Man 2.1 situation, where it's mostly extended scenes that are unneeded in the actual final cut of the film. This has many cutscenes that had their own plot points, own character points, and crucial to the original story that they were telling. This show had such a strange release too, because they also aired out of order on television. So it's very strange, and apparently the 15-minute cuts are supposed to be the final canon episodes, but I mean, let's be real. Every Tugs fan will tell you they are not. I will say, for most of the episodes that we don't have the 20-minute cuts for, don't actually feel like you're missing too much when you watch the 15-minute cuts. The editors honestly did a really good job in that aspect. Honestly, the episode that got shortened the most, that I feel is the most tragic, is HighWinds. It is also one of my favorite episodes of the whole series. So, let's talk about it. I love HighWinds because it goes against the status quo. In Tugs, we have the Sttar Tugs, who are the good guys, and the Z Stacks, who are the antagonists. We see that the Z Stacks aren't that great of Tugs. Zoran is the one who causes most of the problems for the Stars. Zack and Zebedee tend to always be by his side. Zug seems like he has some potential to be Zoran's right-hand man if he was smarter. And the nicest one we see is Zip. But it's also important to note that we really never got to see Zip's devious side because it was cut in the 15-minute cut of Warrior. So when I was repiecing the 20-minute cut together, I was like, oh, dang, I never realized that Zip had a whole devious side to him. So what I'm saying is that none of the Z Stacks are that complex of characters besides just being the antagonist to the Sttar Tugs. But what HighWinds does is it takes Zebedee, who at this point wasn't even that notable, and shows a new side to him. It starts small. Zebedee is losing a barge and Tencent offers to help, which he refuses as usual, until he actually asks for help. A small sign of what's to come. This is something that Zoran would absolutely never do, taking help from the Sttar Tugs. So later in the episode, when the Stars need help, Zebedee doesn't want to help them, but he actually ends up helping anyway. Now, this wouldn't be too notable if Zebedee just helped them because he was helped, and then the lesson would just be, helping people is morally right. Instead, we expand upon that even more. This episode introduces a character named Johnny Cuba. Johnny Cuba isn't an antagonist like the Z Stacks. He's like straight up evil. He's not just like, oh yeah, we're friendly competition and I might not help someone if they're getting to be sunk by another boat. No, Johnny is a gangster who is shady and has a criminal past. He has a history with Captain Zero, the head of the Z Stacks, and is implied that they have done some criminal things together. They eventually had a falling out as well. Zebedee ends up running into Johnny Cuba, and Johnny threatens Zebedee into helping him. So with that in mind, Zebedee is out having to steal barges while looking for ships to tow for Captain Zero, and also having to help the Stars all at the same time, and to me this shows Zebedee's true character. He's in an incredibly stressful situation, but he still looks out for Tugs to tow, like his boss told him to do. He still makes the time to help the Stars when they need him most, and he does Johnny Cuba's dirty work because he was being threatened. Zebedee might be a jerk to the others in previous episodes and goes along with the competitive nature of getting the contracts, but he's actually not that bad of a guy. We get to see his own perspective from things, and unlike Zip, who wants to help the stars, but when they need it most, Zebedee is actually there, and he actually has the courage to go up to them. Unlike Zip, Zebedee doesn't float around and do nothing. When Hercules catches Johnny Cuba with Zebedee, he helps Hercules in catching Johnny Cuba, and the authorities even thanked him. That is how the episode ends. It's a pretty eventful episode with a lot of complexity to it. But this episode, I believe, out of all the ones we don't have the 20s for, like I just said so many times prior, suffers from not having the 5 minutes in the final cut. The pacing is very fast, and there are extremely obvious cuts made to it. Warrior talks about Sally Seaplane, who doesn't even show up. Johnny Cuba's introduction feels rushed and like there was so much stuff cut prior to it. And the stuff with the Coast Guard feels like it would have been heavily expanded upon. This episode is truly great. If you haven't watched the 15-minute cut of this episode, probably recommend you go do that real quick just so we can go into the original 20-minute cut. So with that being said, let's see what they cut. In terms of what we know about the cut scenes for HighWinds, we have a picture book for it, thankfully, and a timing sheet, which is so helpful. The episode starts basically the same way as in the timing sheet and the picture book. After 10 cents would help Zebedee, at 3 minutes and 2 seconds in, we would get our first deleted scene. In the timing sheet, this scene is referred to as 0, and would have lasted 1 minute and 2 seconds. Thanks to the picture book, we actually know what the dialogue was going to be. We would get to see Zebedee meeting up with the rest of the Zeros to hear their jobs for the day. Captain Zero says, "This storm will mean salvage work. Take advantage of distress calls," which explains why Zebedee had that job earlier. Zoran talks about raising their tow prices, which is what Captain Zero wants. He then warns the Z-Stacks that Johnny Cuba is visiting the port and he doesn't want to see any of them doing dealings with him. And I quote, "If any of you bump into him, I'm not home. Okay?" End quote. Such a goofy piece of dialogue. I'm kind of upset that this was cut. Alright, the next scene is another deleted one, lasting 1 minute and 28 seconds. We would get to see 10 Cents, Sunshine, and Lily. The footage from this scene was actually repurposed in Regatta. We know this because the barge 10 Cents has is the same from earlier in the episode, and also, thankfully, due to the picture book. In the 15-minute cut of Regatta, we also get to see a close-up of Lily, with fuel likely from when 10 Cents and Sunshine left her, which is kind of cool to see. Sunshine talks about how great it is to see her, and Lily says, and I quote, "Thank you, Sunshine. It's always nice to have company." And speaking of company, he doesn't seem to be very sociable, end quote. This most likely would have cut to a shot of Johnny Cuba. Sunshine, being kind and considerate, thinks that Johnny Cuba might need a tow, so he goes up to Johnny Cuba. Thanks to the history of Tugs' Google Doc, we get to see an image of Sunshine going up to Johnny Cuba, and it appears that 10 Cents might have followed him a little before stopping, possibly even warning him. Oh my gosh, the freaking Tugs project just released a new image. What? Was I right? Was I right about this? This is so cool, oh my gosh. Sunshine is very kind to Johnny, but he isn't to Sunshine. Johnny tells Sunshine to scram, and Sunshine leaves upset. But the Coast Guard was actually watching it the whole time behind some rocks. The next scene, lasting for 2 minutes, has the Coast Guard confront 10 Cents and Sunshine, asking what their affiliation is with Johnny Cuba. The Coast Guard tells them who he is, and they both have a, "Oh, so that's who it is" moment. 10 Cents asks if Johnny Cuba is in some sort of trouble, and the Coast Guard suspects that he is on one of his smuggling runs. Sunshine asks why he just doesn't arrest Johnny, but the Coast Guard doesn't have anything on him just yet. The Coast Guard leaves, and OJ tells 10 Cents and Sunshine to go to Scuttlebutt Pete to help clear the bay. Alright, now we return to the 15-minute cut. It's 3 minutes and 3 seconds into the 15-minute cut and 7 into the 20-minute cut. Already almost 4 entire minutes have been cut. Johnny Cuba hits the Coast Guard as he goes into Big City Port. Now at 3 minutes and 46 seconds into the 15-minute cut and 7 minutes and 47 seconds into the 20, we get this scene with Warrior and Sally, who was mentioned in the 15-minute cut. Warrior is towing her to her hangar because the winds are too strong. She talks about flying over and seeing Hercules bringing in Princess Alice, who appears to be damaged. So Warrior now knows to tell the others. We cut back to the 15-minute cut at 3 minutes and 47 seconds in, and the 20 at 8 minutes and 15 seconds in. It plays out like we see in the 15-minute cut. Zebedee brings in Johnny Cuba. Johnny threatens to kill Zebedee if he doesn't do what he wants. Zebedee helps 10 Cents and Sunshine with Scuttlebutt Pete. I found out that this slide transition to Zebedee going to steal the coal wasn't a weird 15-minute cut thing, and it was intentional, which genuinely shocked me. I thought it was just trying to be a seamless transition. Zebedee delivers the coal. Warrior tells Big Mac what Sally told him. Zebedee helps the Coast Guard and Princess Alice. He and Hercules arrest Johnny Cuba. And oh look, we're almost near to the end of the episode. In the 15, we are at 13 minutes and 22 seconds. And in the 20, it's at 18 minutes and 12 seconds. This deleted scene has Zebedee being scolded by Captain Zero in front of the others at Stacks. Zero is disappointed how nobody got any salvage work or extra fees. He orders all of them to go, but the Coast Guard shows up and asks to have a word with Zero. He tells Zero about Johnny Cuba, and Zero immediately starts denying any affiliation with him. He goes on about how he told his thugs to stay away from him. The Coast Guard says how Zebedee didn't stay away from him. And while all the Zeros look at Zebedee, Zero immediately tries to clear his name, but the Coast Guard interrupts him to say that Zebedee helped arrest him. Zero immediately switches his tone and starts to say that he was going to praise Zebedee. Yeah, sure, man. Thanks to the Tugs project, we get to see how Zib and Zug smiled, probably being proud of Zebedee. The episode ends just like the 15-minute cut, and the final time for it would have been 21 minutes and 19 seconds. So now that we know of the deleted scenes in the order they appeared in, I think now is a good time to point out that Chris Tulloch, who is the voice for Zoran, and he did many temp dubs and was also the art director, decided while reading the original HighWinds script, which was completely different. Thanks to the history of the Tugs doc, we know that it had Hercules bring in 3 damaged ocean liners during a bad storm. Chris Tulloch was reading it and realized that they simply couldn't do this episode with the size of the water tank. So he took a weekend and decided to rewrite an entire episode. Yeah, this episode that I love so incredibly much was written over a weekend. Robert Cardona encouraged Chris Tulloch to direct it as Dave Mino was too busy helping with the editing of the previous filmed episodes. So this is the episode I've been talking about this entire video. Not only does it have a great story, but it doesn't have the director involved with it. But did these deleted scenes help with the episode's problems that I had with it before? Well, Johnny Cuba had a way better introduction, and we got to spend some time with him prior to his interactions with Zebedee, which was great. The Coast Guard had way more scenes, and his part of the story gives us actual time to breathe. And the pacing is so much better. The biggest issue I have with the 15-minute cut is how rushed the beginning is. It's so obvious that Johnny Cuba had some build up to him, that they set up multiple character stuff early on. Like, Zebedee meets Johnny Cuba so quickly, and then we're just thrown into all of it. All of the crime part of it. Also, it's nice to finally know what Scuttlebutt Pete was even doing there. We really just had Zebedee's perspective in the 15-minute cut, because Scuttlebutt Pete just shows up for seemingly no reason. I imagine the scene, "They can't hold Johnny Cuba, the authorities could indeed hold Johnny Cuba," has exclusive narration from Captain Sttar for the 15-minute cut, but I can't lie, I find that so incredibly funny for how quick that was. So yeah, the 20-minute cut would have fixed pretty much every major issue I had with this episode, which is a shame that we have never gotten it. I am still hopeful that it exists somewhere, and one day it will be fully released. Oh yeah, Johnny Cuba has a book taking place after the events of this episode, by the way. So Tugs had these original stories that would take place after the show. Some appeared in the 2 annuals the show got, and others were standalone releases. It is important to note that this story was written by Fiona Hardwick, who worked on writing these sorts of books for kids' TV shows. She also did like a Thomas story too, which is kind of cool. Some of you won't like this on principle because it was not being written by any person who worked on Tugs. But I don't think we can be terribly picky when we do not have much Tugs content to choose from. So let's talk about what happens in the story. Johnny Cuba is back once again. Guess he was right about them not being able to hold him. Blue Nose is also returning, interestingly enough. I guess he recovered. The Coast Guard goes over to Johnny and says he's coming aboard, which Johnny Cuba actually lets him, saying, "Go ahead, I've got nothing to declare." The Coast Guard goes up to Sunshine asking if he can tow Johnny, as Johnny wants a tow. But then he's stupid and says, "Oh, well, I can't because we're busy with Blue Nose." This was supposed to be kept a secret, and Sunshine just said that right in front of Johnny Cuba. My goat is washed. Johnny then threatens Sunshine and says if he wants to keep his stack intact, he'll tell one of his friends to give him a tow. For some reason, the book sees this as bullying. Like, no, Johnny Cuba was threatening him. Like, Johnny Cuba has threatened to sing Zebedee before. This was not just, oh, he's bullying me. No, this is a threat. For some reason, the story, the guy that everyone was afraid to go by, has Big Mac, OJ, 10 cents, and Zip. All go right by him. Zip is a weird one too, like why would Captain Zero want his Z stack going there? Johnny ends up taking a nap because nobody's gonna tow him until he wakes up to see a submarine. He's all like, huh, that's weird, why is that even there? Then he realizes it's a spy wanting to see what the new ships are like. And since Blue Nose and the Coast Guard are both there, nobody can stop this. Weirdly, this whole build-up kind of happens off-screen. I thought we were going to see, like, Johnny Cuba, like, through a couple pages, triumphantly be, like, chasing the submarine down and then, like, just freaking nailing it against the wall, but no, just all off-screen. When they see Johnny Cuba trap the submarine, the Coast Guard and Blue Nose are like, oh, cool. Then Johnny ends the story by saying that there's only room for one scoundrel around here. For taking the Coast Guard and making him so indifferent to Johnny Cuba is very lame. Except I lied! This isn't the Coast Guard. This is the Customs launch. A completely different character mentioned in one episode that never got designed until this book. Okay, I'm like 70% sure it was supposed to be the Coast Guard though. Like, it's literally the same design. It's unsurprising that a kid's book made by someone who wasn't involved with the show has some mischaracterization. It's a fine enough book, but it's really disappointing how they took an amazing villain character, let him out with absolutely no explanation, and had him be a misunderstood good guy. Did they have therapy in his prison or something? Like, I sure hope so. I mean, good for him, but like, in all honesty, I'm really not offended by the portrayal of Johnny Cuba here. I'm more just disappointed. We don't have much Tugs content to begin with, so like, okay, cool, you know, Johnny Cuba, but it wasn't that worth it. So that was a look at Johnny Cuba and HighWinds. I would love to cover more deleted scenes from Tugs episodes. I'm thinking I could do Quarantine next, as it's the only episode to not get a picture book, but it had 2 adaptations. So let me know if you're interested in that. Anyways, bye.